The last couple of years have been good for Indian exports, with growth in both volume and value. This fiscal, however, is proving to be a different story. Geopolitics, large-scale supply chain disruptions, and a weak global demand has proved to be the headwinds for Indian exports. All eyes are now on the Finance Minister and Budget 2024 to help Indian export industries. To talk more on this, we have with us today independent trade expert Manasvi Srivastava, Ajay Srivastava, co-founder GTRI, Baljinder Sharma, co-founder India-Africa Business Network, and S Gujral, managing director, Syrma SGS Technology. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
So let's get some context. Manasvi, coming first to you, how do you see India's exports panning out this year, and how are exporters placed?
Well, it's a little too early to conclude because the first 2 months have been, of course, very good. If you look at the previous fiscal year and compare the figures of April and May, obviously there has been a jump, I believe about 7% or so in merchandise exports. But if you, let's say, look at the total numbers, which is about how much, well, whatever it is, I'm forgetting the numbers, but if you multiply it by 6 to prorate it to the entire year, you still get the same number that you got in the previous year, which was about 450 odd million USD. So these 2 months to me don't indicate much. What, of course, is of immense importance is that the temporary leg up that Indian exports have got due to the petroleum exports is not going to last, because the wars are not going to last forever. And of course, fossil fuels are not going to last forever. So something needs to be done if we need to, something drastic needs to be done if we want to even reach near the target of 2 trillion total exports by 2030.
Right. Ajay, coming to you, the same question, if I can pose to you, how do you see India's exports panning out? Manasvi talked about a large part of that, at the moment, if it is looking good, a large part of that is actually petroleum, which is probably, camouflaging the real numbers. Where do you see trade going? How do you see exporters doing?
I say let's begin with the big picture. And trade accounts for $1.6 trillion or 42% of Indian economy, Indian GDP. Exports alone, they account for about 20% of our GDP. And is this small or big? For China, the number is almost the same, about 20%. For US, it's 11.6% only. So exports as a share of economy are doing very well in India. And let's talk about growth. So growth in the past 5 years, between say 2019 and 24, the growth in merchandise exports has been about 42%. And if we talk about this fiscal, Ministry of Commerce released the data yesterday only. And they say our combined growth of merchandise and services exports exceeded 8.6% for this quarter, April to June quarter. Now, how do we talk about the future? I mean, immediately coming months, what's likely to happen? So UNCTAD, for the first time in the past 2-3 years, they say for the first time global trade growth may be positive, 1%, 2%. And they say even this 1 or 2%, despite geopolitical and other tensions, it will be led by China and India, growth in China and India. China's growth by 9%, India, they are placing at 7%, and our growth is about 8.6%. So as a growth will be there, it will be tepid because of so many international events that are going on. We know raw material prices have increased because of Russia-Ukraine war. Then we see our exports are taking longer route because of shipping disruptions at the Suez Canal route. And then we see in the next 2 years, our exports, steel, aluminum will be facing big crisis because of the European green laws like carbon border adjustment tax, deforestation tax will be affecting our agriculture exports, supply chain resilience will be affecting all the exports. So it's shaky. So world trade, it will be affecting not only India, but the world trade, it will be shaky. But we are already in the positive trajectory, we'll be moving on not at a big double-digit rate, but the single-digit rate, because first quarter already proven this. There are certain, of course, internal challenges which we have to meet apart from meeting the external challenges which I just described. Internal, the biggest challenge today is despite the growth in electronics products, and that's a very welcome change. We never had positive in electronic export growth. Now, our growth in labor-intensive products, that is our mainstay, traditional exports. Today, labor-intensive exports, they're lower than they were in 2015 level. So we have to take care of these bits and pieces, and global trade scenario is tepid, but India's growth will be there at the higher end of the single digit.
Right. Interesting. Mr. Sharma, coming to you, while trade looks like it's in a bit of a flux, there's a lot of talk about India trying to diversify its trade markets, and Africa is one of the area of interest. How is India-Africa trade at the moment?
I mean, if you go back in history, you would realize that almost the world's entire sort of trade happened in the Indian Ocean. So that's the context, and I think it's just in India-Africa trade has a tremendous advantage because of the ocean that we share. And I always think, why is it that it's difficult to transport goods from the ports in Western India to ports in Africa when you can have, why is the entire African market flooded with Chinese goods? They have to, the cost to transport is higher and so on. So there are those challenges. In terms of growth, I may not have the exact figures because again, the figures are, or not, and then it's very sad, but Africa is not really kind of tracked or looked at in a way that you track markets in the Western, the Western market. So there is, I think just while there's a lot of talk about Africa, I don't think it actually translates. And again, most of it is you would find that it's kind of driven by MSMEs and sort of individuals traveling there and sort of doing, sort of trying to connect and do this trade. Large scale trade doesn't really happen, which is sad, and which I think has the potential to capture market from China. So those are some of my thoughts. I would we've also recently thought whether you could look at e-commerce as a for international e-commerce as a way to improve small high value merchandise export and so on. So we sort of there's signs there that this could actually sort of, we've also seen the recent e-commerce export policy from the Indian government. Again, sort of at a macro level, we all know that India imports mostly mineral resources and petroleum from Africa. There's literally no, and then obviously commodities, but there's no sort of manufactured goods or anything of that sort coming to India. I think that also needs to change. We believe that with what's happening right now in Africa, there is an opportunity for Indian exporters to set up small, some sort of manufacturing bases or do value-added work there in order to enhance this bilateral trade. I don't know whether that answers the question, but I thought this
right.
was mine.
So at the moment, you're saying that trade between India and Africa is very nascent, very limited.
Yes, and it's sad because in India and Africa traded the most in olden times. So I think those kind of factors still remain. The fact of distance, for instance, it's easy to sort of trade between the port of Mombasa and the port of Chennai or Mundra, for instance. We could do much more, but we're not doing it.
Right. Mr. Gujral, coming to you, Ajay, in fact, mentioned that electronic export is something that India is doing well. So what are your thoughts on the state of exports, electronic exports, that is from India, and it's looking very good, but is that really the case?
I think let's have the figures. India exports approximately $29 billion worth of electronics. Vietnam, less than 1/10 of our population, maybe a less than third of our GDP, exports $142 billion of electronics. That's, I think, a 22 number, 22 or 23, 2022. So China may be close to $1 trillion. So while the base in India was small, but I think the headroom available is immense. Unfortunately, majority of the Western corporations have preferred to go to Vietnam than come to India. And there was some sort of analysis in today's Hindustan Times, which says in the 10-year period, 13 to 24 or 14 to 23, 2014, the Vietnamese exports to the Western world have grown at a CAGR of 12.6%. India is a second and half of that. Electronics exports in India account for less than 3% of our GDP. It's 36% in Vietnam. So I'm giving these figures so that we have a sort of a broader picture of what is the size of opportunity which is available. And just because we are growing in electronics, maybe in a double-digit thing, should not lull us into a feeling that all is very good. Because the growth is available. And if we don't capture this growth, someone else will. And then clawing it back from competition thereafter would be a far more difficult task than grabbing it in the first instance. That's my take on electronics. I think it's up to the industry. The government has done its bit. There are a lot many more things which the government can do. But I think it's largely dependent on the industry to be aggressive in its approach of garnering export markets.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, Pran, if you let me come in
Yes.
just to supplement what Mr. Gujral said, perfectly agreed with him that yes, consumer electronics is an area where we need to grow much faster, much more, because Vietnam has captured a lot of space, which gives us the extent of opportunity available. In India's case, I would say one very promising development is our foray into chip manufacturing. This is something which is high investment, high gestation. So I would expect that, we need not necessarily replicate completely the Vietnam experiment. Every country will have its own variations. Yes, we need to partake of a larger piece of the pie for consumer electronics, but this is one promising piece which needs to be watched in future. If we capture some bit of the chip market internationally, I think that would be a big achievement.
Right. Interesting.
Absolutely
Yes.
agree. I agree, absolutely.
Mm.
Another point, the exports of mobile from Vietnam are 3 times the Indian electronic exports. So
Okay.
there has to be a short term and a long term. The long term is the chip manufacturing, having a component base in India, and MeitY has just come out with a task force report on how to develop the component base in India. But the short term goals have to be achieved. If the electronic manufacturing in India doesn't go up, it doesn't become lucrative to put up components. So it's a sort of a chicken and egg story. The short-term growth has to be captured to ensure adequate investments at the back end, which is the component manufacturing.
Right.
I just want to add in.
Yes.
Can I have, sorry, I have a.
Yes.
I have-
Ajay first and then Mr. Sharma.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all the data mentioned is absolutely correct, but we cannot compare ourselves with Vietnam. We are 2 different countries. How? As I said, that exports to GDP ratio of India or even China is 20%. Vietnam is touching 100%. They are export-driven economy. We are an economy where exports is an outgrowth of economy. What does this mean? Vietnam is signing FTAs at the terms we can never think of signing. For example, Vietnam, when they signed an FTA with the European Union, they agreed that European firms they can get even the smallest contract at the city and village level. They can open shops anywhere. We cannot do that. Our economic pattern doesn't permit this. So Vietnam, I mean, because of this, MNCs, they are finding it a happy place because they can export from Vietnam to everywhere. In many cases, except for few firms, most of the manufacturing takes place in China, and final product, penultimate products comes to Vietnam. From there, it's being exported. So not to belittle Vietnam, but we say when people draw the comparison between India and Vietnam, they cannot be compared. They are export-driven economy, and when they sign agreements, they don't give any credence to the benefit of the local economy. You can have you can study the FTA signed by them and us. For us, exports is a priority, but it's not everything. We don't open our economy beyond a point.
Mr. Sharma?
Yeah, just one, point, that we've seen is how do you deal with export subsidies, for instance, and also unfair trade practices, which is really a geopolitical issue, but it's very much there. So that has a bearing on our ability to export. So don't you think that that's an important element that the government has to deal with at a policy level to make sure that there is a fair play in international trade, and that India doesn't lose out on that front?
Right. Yes. I think that those are some of the issues that the government will have to deal with. And continuing with our discussion, Manasvi, what do you think is the biggest threat to Indian exporters at the moment? And what should the government do to counter these challenges, if anything could be done at all? Mr. Sharma, talked about unfair trade practices. What are some of the other challenges?
In fact, I'll refer to what Ajay had said a little while back, the carbon border adjustment mechanism and similar other ecological considerations, with which I, truly speaking, personally, I completely agree with. Yes, trade needs to be subserving the environment. We cannot look at a world in future where trade is the priority and the environment suffers because our future generations are going to live in it. So that is one big threat. And any economy which is not able to decarbonize with speed will be a big sufferer. I expect that in India, of course, we are on the path to decarbonization. The question is of the velocity. And when does CBAM kick in? Are we prepared? Because I believe 2026 is the time when those taxes on carbon border adjustment mechanism will begin to kick in. Now, this is one part. The second part is that increasingly trade is being interlinked with certain other issues also. How do you treat your workers? How do you treat various other things, labor laws, fairness, etc., etc. We may have a position, India may want to say that, well, keep trade separate from it, but will the rest of the world also listen? I don't think so. We are moving towards a world in which people are looking at not just the economic output per se, but what does that economic output result in? So slowly and steadily, we may try to hold back the pace of those external developments, but we'll have to fall in line. So these two trends that I said, things which are external to trade, affecting trade, like the environmental considerations, the greening of the economy, the carbon intensity of the economy, and things like labor laws, etc., etc. Then the other most important fact that comes to my mind is technical barriers to trade and non-tariff barriers. We would have all heard of the recent issue where ethylene oxide in our spices was made a big issue of, and that issue could have relevance, yes. We would need to be prepared about more and more such quality considerations coming into sway. And there are ways of handling this. One way of handling this is how do you align yourself with various international practices? For example, India has also begun to, in fact, past 3 years, India began to issue a large number of what are called QCOs, quality control orders, which are effectively technical barriers to trade if you look at them as barriers. One intent of that is that Indian quality comes at par with the rest of the world quality in certain sectors, so that when you export, you don't really face these barriers. The other way of dealing with this is how do you weave them into what are called mutual recognition agreements and your free trade agreements, so that a product which is tested in India need not be tested again. It does not face a new barrier which is unsurmountable or which is unpredictable abroad. So these NTBs and TBTs are something that we need to take very seriously. We need to weave them in, not only from a quality perspective, but also from a trade negotiation perspective in our policy.
Ajay, coming to we've talked extensively about Vietnam. China plus one, India was supposed to benefit from that. Have things worked out for India, and what more needs to be done?
Okay, China plus one, lot of hype. Some of it is working, but our aspiration, there is a gap between our aspiration and what happened in the field. But let's see what real has happened. So Apple is the poster boy. They started manufacturing with the help of their contract manufacturers, Wistron and Foxconn, and the results are visible before everyone. The smartphone exports have doubled in a year. Then Samsung, they were present in India for more than a decade. They have expanded their Noida plant in a substantial way. Dell is considering jacking up their manufacturing in India, electronic devices and computers and laptops. Then Tata Group, they are tying up with many Chinese and Taiwanese component manufacturers to start doing these things in India. So I call them China plus one, some level of success. But if we look at overarching scenario, we have top MNCs already manufacturing in India. So we have Toyota, we have Hyundai, we have Ford here, we have GE here, we have Nestle's, Bosch. The list runs into few hundred top MNCs who are doing it, manufacturing from India. But why we feel that more people are going to Vietnam and less Vietnam and even Thailand and less coming to India? There is an iota of truth in this. And I tried to explain that Vietnam provides a ready-to-launch platform for the MNCs. You go, start exporting, and with the help of the Vietnamese FTAs, start exporting here and there. So MNCs, they are today's Vietnam's day. They have very less of core competence. So today is Vietnam's day. Tomorrow, as the labor costs and other costs they rise, MNCs may like to shift to Cambodia, like they shifted from Japan to USA to China and now to Vietnam. They may shift to Cambodia and some other countries. So the thing is that we need to develop core competence. So India, as I said, export is the outgrowth of our economy. We are into trying to develop core competence in these things. So what else we can do for promoting more relocations? So China is the favorite place of most manufacturers for very solid reasons. They provide the industrial raw material at the cheapest price, unlimited quantity, almost unlimited quantities. Their power is uninterrupted. Their infrastructure ports are world class, and they provide substantial financial incentives for many products. When manufacturers come to India and you talk to them, they say, if I relocate to India, my product cost disability compared to China will be, say, 11%. Now it's up to the Indian government to how to meet that 11%. So here I want to say that horizontal schemes like we are good for starting the manufacturing, but for the next phase of growth, we have to select, say, 100 top products, and then we have to see the cost disability vis-a-vis China and see if we can meet them. If we can meet, then only companies will be coming. I think that's the way forward. I mean, from a sector, we need to talk to the product level disabilities.
Mr. Sharma, what are the opportunities for Indian exporters from India into Africa, and what sectors do you think would do well? What is the export potential if there's a figure that you guys have earmarked?
Well, again, as I said, those figures could really be misleading, but I think we all know that pharmaceutical is one area where India has really made an impact. Almost all of pharmaceutical, I mean, and India has been able to Africa being a brand conscious or trademark conscious, having been ruled by the European powers, who are quite conscious on that. But India has been able to make a mark there. IT has been, as you know, is quite an important sector. that has been able to make an impact. We've also seen automobiles, for instance, particularly motor parts and so on. That has been another area. And then in a small way, I mean, particularly in East Africa, for instance, you'll see a lot of Indian, rickshaws and so on. So which you don't really see in many other parts. So there is there is a kind of market that suits the middle level SME manufacturers, which is unique to Africa. So for instance, I'll give you an example that even after Cellora, which was a great brand in India, they discontinued for 10 years. They continued to sell that brand, importing from China, but it was very well received because the black and white TVs, what people still continuing to use them. We've also seen the case of companies like Aptech and NIIT and so on. While they literally stopped their training business in India, they continue to run huge, large scale franchised businesses in Africa. So I think those are some of the sectors that I think also have, again, at our level, what we've been seeing is in the core areas. For instance, if I may just take 2-3 minutes, in the core areas, education, healthcare, agri, energy, I think there is a tremendous potential, which sort of mostly is services export, which is again easy to export because it's not constrained by our lack of infrastructure. So those are some of the areas that we see huge potential, and clearly that potential has not been tapped. Again, for the reason that it's not being seen as a market of choice for Indian exporters.
I'm just wondering, is also because our exposure to the African market is limited, and there are also limited number of maybe institutions, organizations which can help the bridge that connect between industry and industry.
Yeah, so as you would see, the External Affairs Minister has actually been talking in his own way quite a bit recently about Africa. We have, I think we had embassies in like 14 countries. They increased it to 38. So the idea is to have a sort of a diplomatic presence in all the 54 countries in Africa. I think that's clearly the intention. But again, as I said, that this is not really, and I'll give you one example. You have only one India Africa forum set up, I mean, annually, which is hosted by Exim Bank. But beyond that, you don't really see any, I mean, you don't hear, I mean, I'm in it, I know this, but in India, I don't really hear of Africa being logged at a national level. I don't know.
S Gujral, coming to reducing our reliance on China, that has been, our stated objective for quite some time now. How well have we done in this aspect, and what more needs to be done?
Okay, I'll first allude to my reference to Vietnam was not that we should replicate their model. It was that a business opportunity is available. A country which has very limited technical pool of manpower, if it can grab 5 times the business, obviously, there is something which we missed and didn't do. It was not FTAs. It was we were not aggressive enough to capture that group. Now, with the talent pool which we have, both software and hardware, and electronics is no longer static. It's a merger. It's a sort of culmination of the two. I think the opportunity is immense. Have we done enough? Probably not. The component base has to be developed in India. The big companies have taken the lead, but the electronic components, other than the semicon, world over, by and large, they are in the MSME sector. The semicon is the large, the big deep pocket companies. Here, I think with the latest report of the task force, which was released day before yesterday, they recommended to the government some subsidies and enabling steps so that the component base can be developed in it. As long as the component base is not developed in India, the sustenance of the growth in the electronics will be suspect. What the Indian companies need to do is engage with the global multinationals from the product concept stage. Manufacturing is a subsequent stage. So engage with the global companies when the product is at the concept stage. We have the technical pool. If ST can have thousands of software engineers designing their chips in India, so we have the technical pool. Engage with global multinationals, and that will sustain them. The government will, I hope, come up with enabling steps for the component manufacturing. China plus one, honestly, it's a sort of a very misleading statement. The total exports of electronics from India are 29 billion, approximately. One Jabil, it's a multinational company. I'm not even talking of the Apple contract manufacturers. I'm talking of a widely spread manufacturing base. Jabil has an annual revenue of 35 billion plus. So again, these figures are to show that the opportunity is immense. I think the government is proactive, will come out with more measures, but it's largely dependent on the industry. And I'm from the industry. So I would say it's the industry which has to sort of catch the bull by the horns. And as was rightly said, PLIs and all, they're all steroids, short-term measures to support a disability. Long-term, the government and the industry have to work together to remove or minimize. I don't think it will be removed, minimize that disability. And even if the component manufacturing starts in India, as one of the panelists was saying, the basic raw materials will still have to be imported from China. I may manufacture a PCB in India, bare PCB, but the laminates will have to be imported from China. I may manufacture a wound component in India, but the cores or the ferrites or the things, they will have to be imported from China. That's the reality, but it's a thing which we have to live with. So manufacturing backed up by component manufacturing. And then the third stage is the basic materials.
Right. So extensive process we
Yes,
need to go through.
Absolutely.
And there's no shortcut to it.
There's no shortcuts. There's no shortcut. The only thing is that once the electronic manufacturing grows in India, then it becomes viable for the component manufacturers to put investments and start making components in it. With the $29 billion of exports, if I were to make capacitors, it is not enough. I have to access the export markets. But if this 29 billion was to become 58 billion, then the local demand would be reasonably large to take care of the operations till the export markets for the components are developed. So the component manufacturers will have to integrate to the global supply chain, which means that the big multinational or the big MSMEs will have to migrate their supply chains to it. We start manufacturing under their brand name. A component made by an Indian company would require a decent period of time, which could be 3 to 5 years, to get approvals for being used in the products by the multinational companies. So there is a graded step that you have a electronic manufacturing, then you start tying up with component manufacturers. So you make the components in their brand name. And then simultaneously, once those things grow, go into the basic materials if possible, or develop your own brand names.
Honestly, coming to you, we've talked about, the threats, the challenges. What are the big opportunities, Mr. Gujral talked about how things keep changing in electronics and it's not static. Technology does not, remain same. Similarly, probably, opportunities in different field also, will change over the course of years. So what are the big opportunities for Indian exporters?
I would address this in two parts. One is what are the opportunities and how do we crack them, right? So one very big opportunity that I see staring us in the face is relating to the green economy, solar panels, alternative energies. And given the fact that this is also tied up with geopolitics, because certain countries, given the kind of regimes that they are likely to have, may not be very big players in the green economy, whereas the rest of the world is still very keen on it. For example, European Union, they are all for solar panels. They are still very positive about electric vehicles. Whereas in the US, we may see a cooling down of the enthusiasm for such things. China is currently a huge leader in even solar panels, right? India is trying to step up its game using tariff policies and various other incentives. So that is one area. I would say, automobiles, as we've all seen, has been led by certain parts of the world. Is it necessary that that should remain in the future? No, not necessarily. With the electric vehicle revolution coming in, yes, Tesla is the biggest player in the world, but maybe homegrown players can begin to look at another segment of the market that those biggies are not able to address. So one is, so there are multiple facets of the green economy which are staring us in the face, and we need to step up our game to partake in them. The other aspects of the opportunities are rather broad-based, in terms of us streamlining our export incentive schemes. It's wrong to call them so under WTO language, but our export cost neutralization schemes is what I would call them. Our customs procedures and such other stuff. But in case we want to talk about the wish list for the budget, I'll keep that separate. But those are the opportunities also that we need to make sense of. How do we change our processes and not just talk generally, but have specific suggestions so that everything of our policy and practice feeds into export enhancement? So bit of a rambling answer I've given, but one part is that I focused a lot on is the changing nature of trade because of changes in technology, and the fact that the world wants to go green. So how do we grab that opportunity? The other aspect, what Mr. Gujral mentioned, was about how do we take advantage of the China plus N. I would not say China plus one because it is actually China plus N. And if we look at the electronic sector, the three parts that he mentioned, finished goods, components, and your raw materials. The third part actually also is going to very soon become very important because when we look at, say, Africa, China has got a huge presence. And maybe that is where our diplomacy is upping the game, increasing our presence in Africa so that the supply chain for these raw materials, again, is not monopolized or duopolized by a few nations. So upping the game of trade policy and diplomacy to capture their value chain and embedding the supply chain of electronics in India at all levels, finished goods, components, and getting the raw materials in place. So that is the second opportunity. None of these are opportunities that will translate immediately in 1 year or 6 months or 2 years. These are all medium to long-term opportunities, and that's where we need to play the game.
Very, very interesting. Ajay, coming to you, what do you think are the opportunities for India and the role of FTAs? We've talked so much about the UK FTA. We are also in talks with the European Union for one. Where do you think all these things figure out?
I agree with the products broadly mentioned by Manasvi. I'll add my own list of products, and this is based on hard data analysis. So I see big opportunities for India in aerospace, defense, electronics manufacturing services, capital goods, building materials, pharmaceuticals, and packaging. So the combined export of the products from this group was about $100 billion in last fiscal. And the rate of growth in the past 5 years, it was about 90%, and which is more than double the rate of growth of remaining products in India's merchandise exports basket. So these are fast growing products, mostly high tech products. And we need to focus on each of these products, as I say, study the cost visibility instead of talking about the sector. And then some of these may become our big anchor products. And it may not be difficult if I talk about aerospace, making an aeroplane may look impossible today, but in 1980s, we were not exporting a single car. We are the largest small car hub today. Similarly, smartphones, we in just 1 year, we jumped twice in export turnover. So by focusing on each product group, studying the disability and trying to meet the disability through various policy means, I think some of these may be a big winner, which may increase India's turnover many times. So, so this is about the product part. Now the FTAs. So we have signed FTAs with almost everyone. So we have done FTAs with ASEAN, Japan, Korea in 2010-11. Then in the past 4 years, we have done FTAs with the UAE, with the Switzerland, Norway, Mauritius, Australia. Now we are almost done signing the FTAs with the UK, and Oman is also ripe for signing. Just a political intent is needed. EU, we are halfway negotiating. America, we have signed part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. That's not a true FTA, but still we can call it trade agreement. So except for China, we have free trade agreements with almost all the countries. Either we have signed, implemented, or we are in the process of negotiating and will be completing the negotiation in the next few years. So everyone except China, even with China, we have a small time trade agreement where we offer part tariff concessions. It's called Asia Pacific Trade Agreement. So we have trade agreements with most countries of the world. So government has negotiated, signed these agreements. Now it's up to the exporters to study the nuances of each and take benefit. So on this part, I say people have not taken full benefit. That's what the government feels. And government has done its bit. Now it's up to the exporters to study these and take benefit from this. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Sharma, Manasvi talked about how, Africa can be one area where we actively look for, raw material. And, in terms of business as well. What are the challenges that you see for Indian exporters to Africa? Is the cost of exporting to Africa just a little too high?
Okay, so as Mr. Gujral spoke about the supply chains, one of the things that you would know that supply chains are broken in a way. The ports are not good quality. There are few ports. So even if you get your goods to a port, it's very hard to get them to markets in the interior of Africa and so on. So that's one big problem. The other problem is that sometimes these supply chains, for instance, in the case of China, they control the supply chains. Okay, so they have their own, the manufacturer, they have their brand, they have their own distribution network, and they are often integrated into the governments, directly. So they are able to move their products and their services very, very much more efficiently than India is able to do. So that's one thing. And that is also true for African exports to India, although India imports from Africa quite a lot. But again, as you would know, many of these countries have dictatorships or have vested interest. And I think India has not been able to go and negotiate these deals very effectively, which is, which I think the Chinese have been. We know these stories, so I'm not going to repeat them. We know them. Okay, let me just quickly come to the opportunities. I see there are tremendous opportunity. I'll tell you why. Even if you leave aside the merchandise export, in terms of services alone, education is a huge opportunity. I think that's not being tapped. The whole of Africa needs to be educated. There are very few universities. There are very few, so some of the Indian, and we have the advantage of being English speaking. So and large parts of Africa, although there's a francophone part, but large parts of Africans speak English. So we have an advantage there in terms of. Similarly, I think on the healthcare also, remote healthcare, we see a lot of Africans now traveling to India for their healthcare needs, particularly on the western side. So And then energy, we spoke about energy, the International Solar Alliance. In fact, we recently met with them. They are they're in the process of putting up an Africa facility to be able to fund some of these, or sort of kind of aggregate this sort of minor projects and kind of bring some volume there and help finance it. So what I'm saying is that there are core sectors there. So it's like hunger. You need food. So it's easy to kind of fulfill those needs and be able to supply or manufacture locally. Technology is another area where I think India has been able to make affordable technologies that I think can be easily exported. It's just that we need a sort of greater focus, which unfortunately is not there. But it should come in time, and hopefully that will work for India.
A greater focus needed. Mr. Gujral, coming to you, you've spoken at length about some of the opportunities that Indian electronic exports can tap into. What are some of the other things that probably you guys and your peers are looking at in terms of opportunities? And is there a plan to get there? What's the strategy like?
See, the current state of the electronics in India is essentially electronic manufacturing services, just as it was the software services. For long-term sustenance, we have to become a product country or a company. Services will keep having pressure on margins because we have to move up the value chain. So when we move up the value chain, we need to be a product company. Electronic companies, they have to make products. Unfortunately, in the services also, software services, we don't have a company which makes a Microsoft Office. It's not that the talent is not there, but somehow it's only some odd small packages which are made in India, which are marketed under their brand name. But in services also, we lag in the products. In electronics, I think we have this opportunity. The government is very clear that it will support it. There has to be a more interaction and sort of dialogue between the R&D institutions, whether it's IITs or other institutions, and the companies to join hands to start making products. Without products, electronic manufacturing will continue with little value addition, and the labor arbitrage over a period of time will get diluted, if not fully negated. So hence, it's very, very essential. And now, honestly, the CSR is a very good opportunity with companies contributing CSR to the IITs or the developmental institutions. Indirectly, they can take benefit of the inherent strength in these institutes for developing products. And as it was pointed out earlier, there are certain mature technologies, there are certain evolving technologies. EV is an evolving technology. So it's right time for the Indian institutions and the companies to plunge into these evolving technologies, because the gap between the head start, we don't really have a big handicap on that. In combustion, we may have had a big handicap. But in EV, the technologies are evolving, and very rightly pointed out. I think we should jump full force to get integrated to these evolving technologies, as it was referred to as green technologies. The second and the most important thing is that we should integrate ourselves with the global of electronics. And that can only happen to start to become a contract manufacturer to a global company, and then have a structured plan. How do we do the backward integration or bring in the backward back-end things into it? That's the only way out. Plain vanilla EMS technology, the business will keep growing. Business growth, I don't think should be a thing, but then it will be at wafer thin margins and essentially on labor arbitrage. And this labor arbitrage is going to get negated, diluted over a period of time.
Right. So staying with you, Mr. Gujral, and last questions to everyone. What is your wish list from budget this year? We've talked extensively. What do you want the FM to do?
See, on the greater top line policies, they're always very good, but the devil lies in the details. And unfortunately, the details are missed out. Getting custom clearances, all those things, warehousing, for example. Today, the distributors are willing to import components and warehouse it in India. But there is some policy restriction which prevents them from exporting back as and when they want. They have to go back to the government to take permission. So a distributor has imported components, say, based on an Indian company's demand, and that demand is not fructifying. He has a demand in the international market. He says he should be freely allowed to export back to that country or to that customer. But current policy statements prevent that. Hence, the global, distributors are not willing to open up warehousing for MSMEs, which are the bulk, the backbone of the electronic manufacturing. Now, if this small policy decision was to be taken care of, it cuts down the working capital requirement of the companies because I don't need to stock components based on the 6 weeks, 8 weeks of shipping time. It is one day's flight time from Bangalore or wherever the stockist warehouse is. But these down the line detailed sort of devils are not taken off in the budget. Policy statements are made.
Interesting. Mr. Sharma, coming to you, what is your wish list?
So I would just want to see some investment in supply chains. I think just one sentence answer. I think that to me is critical.
Right. Ajay, what would you like to see in the budget?
I would love to elaborate on what Mr. Gujral just said. I will just take one of the issues, very small issues. So our merchandise imports are about $680 billion. And thousands of the firms, they used to import paying custom duties. But what is the custom duty for a product? It's almost impossible to know for not only a layman, but for the person like me who spent more than 2 decades in this field. Sometimes when I read custom notification, it takes me more than 4 hours to understand what is written there because they're not self-contained. One custom notification may be linked to 20 others. Sometimes they refer back to 20-year-old notifications, and the language is bizarre, and it fails all the scrutiny. The language, they will say serial number 2 of notification number this of 5 years back is changed from X to Y. You know what the product it is talking. Ultimately, if you after wasting your 5-6 hours, you will come to know, for example, that tariffs on smartphones have been reduced from say 20%, 10%. They can't write like this. You have to study 20-30 notifications, take help of an expert, and then also you may be wrong many of the times. So I says, and most of the countries, they have sorted this out. Notification should be self-contained. All the tariff list should be in Excel available to everybody. Customs has this because they clear the consignment day in and day out based on this, but it's not in the public domain. So there is an urgent need to improve the language of the notifications. They should be made self-contained. If we can't do even this small change, then I will have very little hopes for bigger changes. Thank you.
This is not glamorous. You see, this is not
Yes.
glamorous. It doesn't catch the headlines.
Yes, Mr. Gujral, I totally agree.
Interesting. Manasvi, I will let you have the last word.
Okay. So there are 3 points that I'll make, and one of them is connected to what Mr. Gujral mentioned. There is a particular scheme called MOOW, Manufacturing and Other Operations in a Warehouse. And it was launched with a lot of fanfare, but somehow
The budget, right? I think it was a part of the budget.
Yeah, probably 2019 or 20,
Yes.
somewhere around that time. And everybody felt that, this is going to be a big blockbuster scheme. People are going to be gaga over it, but it did not take off. Why it did not take off? Because what was given with one hand, some of it was taken away by the other hand. For example, if you do operations under MOW rules, then you are not entitled to what is called RODTEP, the RODTEP benefits. So some of those benefits, which, they may seem like small changes, but it makes a big difference, because 2 or 3% cost overrun also can change your profitability in the export market. So whenever these schemes are drawn up or tinkered with, I think extensive interactions with the industry need to be done. And extensive does not mean you have to do it over 6 months or 1 year. I mean, it's possible to make sense of the industry inputs in a short period of time and take a rational decision. Similarly, the problem that Mr. Gujral mentioned, it can probably be absorbed in this scheme if you enlarge its ambit to not just manufacturing, but trading operations as well. So some of these things government needs to think about as to why it did a scheme which was launched with a lot of fanfare, it did not take off, and amend it in time and make use of it, because you already have it on the table. Second is certain very long-standing issues of customs, and they have never been solved. One of them is, some people here may know, issues relating to special valuation branch. Whenever you have transactions between related parties, it's a nightmare. You have cases which are going back 15 to 20 years for officers to decide. No officer is going to ever decide it. So what is pending for 20 years will become pending for 30 years. Now, for these kind of long-standing issues, why don't you have something like a settlement or a lok adalat kind of a thing, in which across the table, officers and the businesses sit and they sort it out. And reason why I'm mentioning this is that even though this may not look connected to export, somebody who's setting up business here is not just going to subserve the export market. He's going to serve the domestic market as well, and he's going to import. And much of the, I believe 70 to 80% of the imports by large importers is between related parties. So I don't understand why this has not been solved. Again, this is not glamorous work, as it was pointed out. It needs to be done by the officials in charge. It may not be announced by the finance minister in the parliament, but it makes hell of a difference. The third thing is relating directly to exports. If some simplification can be done in what is called seeking the special brand rate of drawback. We all know about the oil industry rate of drawback, which is much easier to claim, but the special brand rate of drawback, I believe the process is still manual, and which creates all those issues of human interface and rent seeking and such stuff. So these are the three things which I hope, if they are addressed both in the trade policy as well as in the budget, it would make life easier.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I would just
Mr.
like
Gujral?
to add one point.
Yes.
One point, I think the special export zones, EHTPs, EOUs, if they are allowed domestic access, it enables them to utilize the capacity to the fuller extent. Today, we have units in the EOU, EHTPs, which are not having full orders for exports, but they can't. They can, but again, the detail and the procedural approvals are so large and tough that they refrain from doing it. So a DTA access, which has been a long pending demand, it has still not been addressed.
Mr. Sharma, you had something to add.
So, I always, I've lived abroad most of my life, and I find it quite intriguing that someone of the stature of Ajay, for instance, is not able to get himself heard, because it's so simple, and you're heard in many ways, because I've read you and so on. You're an important voice. If such an important voice cannot be heard, I mean, so how do you get yourself heard? Sorry, I'm just posing a question to close.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hope the FM hears what we've spoken today. It might not be about the Tamara's big bang announcements. Probably trying to settle these smaller issues which go a long way in affecting business. I think that would do a lot of help to Indian exporters. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.